Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. I am your host, Elizabeth, and I am joined here today by Laura. And she is an amazing human being that I have loved connecting with. And she is actually the one who has done my latest round of developmental edits on my own memoir. It's been such an enlightening experience to work with you, Laura, and see the way that we've been able to collaborate on my story and the ways that you have helped me see the strengths that already existed there, the ways to sort of shore up things or add some additional emotionality to it. But I also just really loved how, as I was reading through your edits, it was like I was watching you ride the roller coaster of my book. The way that you would cheer me on. And I mean, I would say 75% of the feedback was just all this positive reinforcement of this is amazing. Oh, I love this. You're really holding the tension here. And just your experience even as a reader of the manuscript. And then the other 25% was super helpful, effective, redirects or questions to think deeper. And it's been such a great experience working with you as an editor. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today. So let the audience know a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into some questions and conversation.
Thanks for saying all that, Elizabeth. It's just been a joy to work with you, but also, of course, get to know you personally. I have been doing independent freelance editing and ghostwriting for almost 9 years now. I'm also a writer, so I love kind of being able to work with writers and have that experience from the inside out. I've been working on my memoir for 13 years, which is this whole on conversation point. But I'm just so passionate about meeting people, especially people who feel like I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. People have told me in the past that I'm a bad writer. I don't think I can do this, but also I cannot ignore this voice. Something is compelling me to tell my story. How do I get there? And it's such a privilege to step alongside somebody on that journey of doubt and self-discovery and exploration and help them find some kind of successful conclusion where they felt like they became the person they were meant to be on the other side of their book. There's really nothing like it. And so I appreciate the praise, but also what I feel is just like the writer brings the magic, and I love being the mirror to reflect that magic back and then maybe offer nudges in certain directions. So I love what I get to do.
That's so beautiful. And honestly, I think it was the fact that you were still wrestling with your own memoir writing that made me feel extra comfortable in working with you, because I knew that you understood the struggle of capturing your own story on the page. What do you think, or let's talk a little bit about the challenges of writing memoir and how, as writers, we're so close to our own stories that it can be really difficult to nail them down on the page. And then there's life changes that may affect how we view our own story. Clearly you have an experience with that. 13 years trying to nail down your own history and a story you want to share.
Yes. Oh, it's such a good question. I feel like you already highlighted some of them. But I over 13 years, I've probably written 15 full drafts from scratch of this story. So I do have a breadth of experience of what it's like to take a life experience, treat it like a gem, and start to turn it to see the different facets. And ask yourself that question continuously. What facet do I want to pull together for this book? I think that book writing is this kind of like soul experience. It's not just a transaction of getting words on page and then getting that product out to the readers. It's also a deep excavation of your own soul, your own journey, your own process. There's so many layers to that. The first draft usually is one that's just kind of a purge. You might not necessarily be thinking about audience and readership. You're just trying to find your way through the dark forest with your tiny little candle, and you're tripping on roots and you're bumping into trees, and you're asking yourself, is this even worth it? And occasionally you glimpse the moon and the stars and you're like, this is glorious. And then you're back into the weeds and the fray. And that, I think, is something that is so important to lean into that. We tend to think that when we're lost and when we're unsure, it means we're doing something wrong. It's actually not a problem. It's part of the process. And then the editing process is really there to help you shape and sculpt through the lens of what do you want to accomplish here? Is your goal to express yourself as honestly and truthfully as possible without consideration of any readers? That's a viable orientation for writing your memoir. And then for some people, they do want to take readers into consideration. They want it to be an experience where readers are feeling some of these techniques like pace, like tension, like information building on itself so that we're not circling back to some of the same patterns. I think one of the pitfalls, just to name, that I see with memoir writing is if it is meant to be a more personal project, we're going to see the writer working out things on the page that sometimes should be happening off the page simply for the reader's clarity of experience. So some of those things might be a sense, like if somebody's holding on to resentment, that's a viable emotion. You can certainly write about resentment, but if you're writing about resentment from inside the resentment, it often makes the reader feel like they want to pull back a little bit. They want to protect themselves. If we are considering reader experience, I think it is the writer's job to take care of the reader, to acknowledge that the reader's entering a contract with you. You might go to some dark places. Memoir usually has a lot of difficulty in it, even if it's a humorous memoir. And the reader wants to know that ultimately they're going to be okay. Kind of in that sense of like, it doesn't have to be a happily ever after. You don't have to give them answers. You don't have to give them any real conclusions that feel neat and tidy about your experience. But you do want them to feel like they're safe with you. And we talk about that in your book a bit, Elizabeth, and just in terms of like the amount of threads that you start to weave together for your story. The reader also wants to know that like, you're going to circle back to the things that are important. You've got their back and you've mastered the process of weaving all these threads together so that they'll feel some kind of satisfaction, not in an answer, but through you, through your own metabolism of your life, which you do so well. So that's, these are the kind of like the skills we start to lay in when something we want to take into consideration is reader experience. And if it's all about just our expression, that's totally fine. And we need to know sort of what contract we're entering with our book and how we want it to exist in the world. So that's kind of one of those fundamental challenges that I think is really important for writers to define for themselves. And it's okay if you don't know right away. Give yourself over to the process of exploration. Keep writing and see if the book has the answer for you.
Absolutely. And I think so many memoir writers get stuck thinking about the reader, the audience, how much they're sharing out into the world in like far too early, where, they don't even get that messy first draft done because they're already thinking like, oh, my parents aren't going to like that I've said this about them. Oh, I'm not sure how to describe this traumatic incident and not, like traumatize my reader. And they get stuck and stalled and blocked trying to make those decisions from the jump. Whereas, like you've said, like you just need to brain dump, get it down on the page, vomit it out. And I think so many of us have early versions of our memoirs that are seeping with vengeance and resentment and all of these things. And what's beautiful about the memoir genre for me and the process and the ways that you change as a person as you work through your story and create this narrative arc and fit all of these pieces of your life into this like hero's journey like story where you get to be the main character, you get to be the hero, is that you learn so much about yourself. You're able to heal parts of yourself that really needed some attention and only got that by putting the story out onto the page. I definitely was able to process some past trauma way more effectively by writing my memoir than through any other prior method of therapy or somatic work. And as I was in therapy at that time during my early drafting days, my therapist even highlighted like how quickly I was able to reconcile with things, integrate experiences into my life because I was also writing during that therapeutic time. And I think that I love that you highlighted that in what you just shared about how it's a process and it's more than just creating a product made from our lives that we can sell for some, income. It's shaping your soul. It's really changing in a lot of ways the way you see yourself, the way you view your history, even potentially the way you view your future. I certainly noticed patterns that kept coming up in my own memoir about how, despite how hard it got, despite how ugly or how uncertain things seemed at times, I always found a way through. So now I just have this strong internal belief that no matter what happens, I can figure it out. I will find a way through. And it's in writing my memoir, in putting it all out on the page and shaping it into a narrative story that I've been able to see that strength that I had all along.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I do think what you're stating is the importance of not censoring yourself early on. It's so essential. And just to name two, you don't have to see these things clearly early on. You can always work with an editor early if you want to, if it feels integrated into your process. And you can, or early readers or people in your life or whomever who can be confidential, who can read the material and who can help you find those threads. Sometimes it's really hard to name that for yourself. It's why we struggle to write our own back cover copy. Or if we're pitching to traditional publishing, why the query letter is so hard, because we're like, I have 150 pages of writing, but what is this about?
Oh,
We
God,
struggle
yes.
to make a concise description. And other outside people can really help you with that. But your job as the writer, especially early on, is to surrender fully to the process and certainly not censor yourself. And I say that because I can relate to that so much in terms of especially family content, how to frame it in a way so that it doesn't look like you're being villainous. At the beginning, don't worry about that. Write with the voice of the story as much as possible. Give yourself over to it. And as you're saying, give yourself over to the things that are yearning to come through you so that you can witness them. It's so interesting that we think we're going to go on this journey of writing a memoir that, number one, we think we know what it's about, maybe. And number two, we think it's going to be this beautiful linear path. It's going to take 3 months. We're going to draft Eat, Pray, Love. Then we're going to be on Oprah and we're going to sell millions. And really the reality is like this spaghetti junction middle where you're like looping around and going down and going backwards and going forward and then shooting back and then back again. It is the craziest roller coaster ride life, maybe outside of parenting. I think there are a lot of parallels between parenting and birthing a book.
For sure.
And
for sure. You just got to do it messy at first with a cup of coffee and you just power through and you learn as you go. And then you revamp, revise, critique, do better. Yeah, it's applicable skills.
Exactly. It's just about showing up. It's just about, to whatever capacity you can. You don't have to be an everyday writer. I don't think. You're welcome to take breaks. I'm not this person who's like, militant with your writing schedule, but you do need to be aware of the times that doubt and resistance gets you and it holds you back. And instead say to yourself, how can I devote 15 minutes to this relationship in my life? Take off all the pressures and expectations you have of a book and what that means and what it's going to do and how you'll be able to leverage it and how people will see you. As much as we can leave all that. And it's okay to have that. It's so human. It's so normal. I have, 13 years experience of dealing with all that. As much as we can leave it at the door when we sit down to write and just say, what is this relationship asking for from me right now? How can I show up as myself in this moment and know that however I'm feeling in this moment is also a part of my writing process? I don't need to get over something I'm experiencing right now. Bring your full self to the page today, all your emotions, all your insecurities, all your doubts, and see what unfolds.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think we've already highlighted a bit about how important it is to not write memoir in a vacuum. There are certainly some dangers you can fall into. You just hit these different blocks. And you and I each offer programming that helps memoir writers at any stage, especially at the beginning where they know they have a passionate story that they want to share, but they're not familiar with all the writing methodology or outlining or how to even approach that, how to identify some meaningful themes in their life and be able to whittle down the story into something that's actually manageable to fit into a memoir versus like a full autobiography. So I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of those dangers of writing in a vacuum, how maybe you have stepped out of that vacuum to seek feedback on your own writing. I've certainly already shared that I've worked with you. I continue to put my stuff out there in order to make sure I'm not missing something because I'm only aware of my own perspective. And it's so helpful for me when I can share something with someone else, and then they highlight for me like, oh, this is confusing. I don't understand what your work used to be. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a common field. Let me explain some more, you know?
Totally. I think one of the great things about memoirists and what I love about working with them is this heightened sense of self-awareness. And sometimes it brings us a lot of grief, but a lot of times it helps us in these moments when we recognize, and this is really true of all writers, so not to only elevate memoir writers. All writers, I think, know when they've lost perspective. We all get to that place where we're like, does this even make sense? Is
Yeah.
anybody tracking? Do you like this? It's like what is happening? Down to the very, very basics of like, can I just have a teacher read this and give me a grade? That's a great time to lean into some support because it's true, we do lose perspective. And a lot of the time, it's hard for us to hold the entire perspective, which is actually often the point of writing memoir. We are looking for something. We are looking for perspective. We might be looking for a tidy answer and discover that there isn't any, or we might be looking for common threads, which you named about yourself, recognizing I've been through all of this and I actually have a resilience I didn't even see in myself. And those things land only through the process of giving ourselves over to exploration. So yes, writing in a vacuum. Again, if somebody's purpose is just to write the book, they just want it for themselves, they don't want any feedback, that's, a valid path. But if your path is going to be to try to change somebody, which often we want somebody to feel seen, heard, and chosen just as they are. We want them to know that they're not alone in their experience. Even if their experience doesn't perfectly mirror ours, there could be emotional resonance. And in that case, it's so important to get feedback. You don't have to have an editor. Editors bring certain kinds of skills, but if you don't have that capacity, lean into some of the people in your life who you trust and give them specific instructions for the kinds of feedback you want. Because sometimes people will take the invitation to read your book and like go in a totally different direction and give you feedback for like a different book. And you're like, well, that's not the one that I wrote. So it's really important to be clear about what you're looking for and how they can be helpful because they want to be helpful. If you ask them, they're probably deeply, deeply honored and they want to serve you as best as possible. And some of the best things to look out for, just craft wise, are scope. Are you covering too much in this book? And you mentioned that a memoir is different than an autobiography. We're not looking to tell the entire story of our lives. And often for us, because we lived through it, we see the way all these threads connected. But the reader doesn't always need to know all of that. You can take them on a journey with less. So less is more in memoir and focusing, whether it's on a shorter timeline, sometimes that's an access point, or fewer themes. That's another access point because you might cover the span of your life. You might have flashbacks to childhood and then forward to adulthood, but they have to have that same kind of resonance. So scope is a great one to ask about. Am I covering too much? Are you tracking? Pacing is another good one. It's so easy for us to get lost in our internal processing, which again is great. It's part of the process. Give yourself over to it and then have the people who can help you pull back because there's a risk of pulling back too much with some of this too, getting too economical so that we lose your voice, we lose your essence. There's a really fine balance. And any individual you work with, editor or non-editor, you're going to get different kinds of feedback, and that's okay. So that's why it's so important for you as the writer to use yourself as your own litmus test. Trust your instincts. Take each piece of feedback. It's sort of like the Marie Kondo tidying up. You like hold it and you're like, does this bring me joy? Does this feel aligned? Is this right for me? And if it is, lean into it. And if it's not, leave it behind and know that that was their experience. But they're just helping bounce things off of you so that you can broaden your own perspective. And what's great about receiving any kind of feedback is you start to see your own work differently and you see it with this broader lens so that even places where they didn't give you notes, you're seeing notes that could have been there. So I think that, it's such a delicate process. Don't always do feedback all the time. Don't necessarily do it too early. Wait for those intuitive hits within yourself of like, I need some perspective. I need help, and lean into that and just see what unfolds from there.
Yeah, I promise you'll hit that point where you're like, I've edited this, I've read over this, I've tweaked it as much as I can. I know I'm not at the point where I'm like, yes, let's hit publish, but I need some help. And that's when it's a great time to, like you said, seek out those resources. We actually have an amazing resource coming up that is free. So if money is an issue for you, we have a free day-long Memoir Summit. And you, Laura, are going to be one of our guest panelists. We have a number of other guest panelists that are going to be talking to us about various stages of the writing process, everything from valuing your story and crafting your idea all the way through the editing, the decisions around publishing, and ultimately the marketing of your story. That Memoir Summit is coming up on March 14th, and we invite you to join our email list so you can get access to that. Again, it'll be free to attend the event live, and we are putting this together simply to support those writers who have determined that this is the year they're going to start writing their story, or this is the year they're going to pull it back out from the drawer or out of the closet and dust it off and take a fresh look at it. And I just know that there's going to be so much valuable information that comes out of that space.
And just to name too, Elizabeth, one thing I love about the summit that I think that we miss sometimes when we're these isolated writers is how important it is for us to connect with community, but also to be in a sphere where we remind ourselves we're not the only ones doing this. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are writing their stories. And the more that you can expose yourself to those spaces and realize that you're not weird, you're not lost, you're not doing it wrong, and here's some motivation, here's some inspiration, maybe here's some tips to help you, the more that you can feel like this is a legitimate thing that you're doing. This is not just something that's happening on the side and it's kind of embarrassing to talk about and you don't want to tell people you're a writer, all relatable things. But what you're doing is actually a really important calling. When you've been called to write a book and you've answered that call, you're stepping into a great unknown for the benefit of not just yourself, but I believe others as well. It's a kind of service, even though it feels very self-oriented, which it is, because if we don't have the lens of the self in our specific stories, it's actually really hard to help other people and help them feel seen and help them metabolize their journeys. So that's another just encouragement for these kinds of spaces and these kinds of experiences, is it just reminds you that you're really not alone and you are cheered on by so many nameless people who want you to succeed and want you to do well and to feel so proud of yourself for saying yes to this path.
Yeah, it's so easy to think that you're egotistical for wanting to write your own story, even though in your heart you know that your push is simply because, like you highlighted earlier, you want others to feel seen. You want them to know that they aren't alone when they struggle through the ways that you've struggled. And maybe there's some glimmer of wisdom that you learned in your journey that they could apply to theirs. And so it's easy in a vacuum to think that, oh, who am I to do this? Why does my story matter? Am I into to even have to talk and share about what you're doing? And people tell you, oh, have you really lived long enough to write a memoir? All the misconceptions about what a memoir is, or that you're not a celebrity and why would anyone want to know about your life? You know, all these falsehoods that live around the memoir genre. Now I would love if you would be willing to venture with me down the road of self-publishing, especially around memoir, the choices we have to make as those who are self-publishing. Of course, we've already talked about that choice of investment in whether you hire an editor or not, which can be one of the more costly parts of writing your memoir or any book. But also the other things that are oddly important, but you don't really think about until you're right at the end, like cover design and formatting and marketing and all of that. I know you have some experience with this recently.
Yes, I first self-published my first book, The Magic of Wellbeing, in 2019. And then just in the last month, I re-released it with a new cover, and I also launched the audiobook. This is what it looks
Did you
like to be a
record it
writer.
yourself?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a lot of work, and anytime you take on an endeavor like this, of course, it's going to be more than you expect. So it's probably best that you don't always know what you're getting yourself into.
Absolutely.
Jump in, and then you'll figure it out. And another great place to have friends or anybody in your corner who's maybe gone through this process who can commiserate, but also nudge you in the right direction. I think everybody who is pursuing self-publishing knows the biggest challenges and the biggest rewards. The biggest rewards being you have full autonomy, you have creative control. Nobody's going to tell you to take certain things out of your book. You really get to own your own story. It's also the highest overhead of what you're going to be paying out of pocket. But through that journey, you get it to be exactly what you want it to be. Things like formatting. We don't often think about formatting until we get to that place. What font do you want? What size font do you want? What margins do you want? And there are some industry standards. The thing is, you don't need to know all these answers. You can work with freelancers who have done this hundreds of times, and they have typical templates. And then you can also ask how yours could maybe be different if they come back with, the most standard font and it's just not resonating with you. You can ask them what other ones might be appropriate, but they're the experts. So they're there to help you too, so that you don't choose something that actually isn't going to translate well on the page. And then to something like cover design, it's really interesting because the cover design process can feel so personal, and people either come into it with a really, really clear idea about what they want, or sort of no idea. And they're like, I need somebody to help me. And again, working with experts and freelancers is a great way to go. And if you have something you want, it's just about communicating that really clearly, putting together what you can call a brief with things like image you want to use, and then figuring out the licensing. So there's so many different rabbit holes to go down, and I'd say just learn as much as you can in the process and lean on these experts, but also communicate as well as you can, especially before starting a project. Elements like, how many rounds of edits do I get to shape this cover and to offer feedback? And if I want to have more than what you offer, what does it cost to do each additional round? And then also, I'll just name as a resource for the people who are in the boat of like, I don't even know like where to begin with a cover. There are awesome platforms like 99 Designs where designers can bid on your project, and then they can create things and offer it to you. If you're somebody who responds better to an existing image rather than creating it in your head, that's a great path to go. Pinterest is also great, where you can put together a mood board. So there are lots of different elements. As much as you can, stay just sort of like organized with the process. There's some great basic articles. You might even have some resources, Elizabeth, that you guys have created over time to help people with this. But every decision is going to contribute to the feeling of your book. So even though we don't want to overload ourselves with overwhelm, at the same time, treat it with care. Slow down if you need to, because this will be the package that your book will have. And that was part of the reason for redesigning my cover. I loved the first cover, but it felt like it ultimately wasn't as timeless as I wanted. And that was not an element that I had really given a lot of thought to with the first cover design. I kind of went with what felt most compelling and maybe a little bit flashiest at that time. And then later on, I realized I actually want this to feel more evergreen and less of the year that it was birthed. And so that's another great thing about self-publishing, is nothing is set in stone. You can always go back to it. The challenging thing about a writer is you're going to release a book that is time-stamped, and you're going to keep growing. And it is hard sometimes to let that book live the life that it's meant to live without wanting to go back and re-editing it. You could rewrite your book. I just had a client reach out to me the other day. We worked on our first book. She said, I think I want to rewrite it. And we had a conversation about it. And I said, you can do that, but also it's really important to honor what you created at that time, which was the greatest expression you could have created. And is your desire to rewrite an existing book, or is your desire actually to write a new book? And she ultimately decided that she wanted to write a new book, that it was about new insights and new discovery. And so there's this interesting ongoing relationship you'll have with your book when it's in the world. And it's so important to continue framing what a success it was for you at that time, and to continue cheering yourself on even as you grow as a person. So I could have done that with my first cover, but in that case, it was sort of, it wasn't too much work to redesign a cover rather than rewrite a book.
Right. You're not rewriting the content inside. You're simply giving it a fresh appearance on the outside. And I love what you highlighted. I am working with Carolina on my cover design, and listeners of the podcast may remember that we had her on as a nonfiction book cover designer and interior formatter last season on the podcast. She will also be at the Memoir Summit, providing her insights from that perspective and about that stage of the process. But what's really cool is that she gave me some homework, and I spent an hour or so this weekend at Barnes & Noble in the memoir section pulling all those books off the shelf, opening them up, seeing what I liked or didn't like about particular, cover pages and where the page number is appearing. Things I had to figure out what I want for my cover because I used to have a really clear idea of what I wanted, and now it just doesn't fit. And so I have to rethink about what I want for the cover. So I was pulling some samples of like, okay, I really love a solid colored background that covers most of the page, some bold lettering for the title, and then a single image that captures the essence of the story. Now, do I have an idea of what my single image should be for my book? No, but luckily she reads my manuscript and she'll come up with her own ideas, and she has a variety of packages, like you indicated, of like, if you have a clear idea of what you want, you can choose this cheaper package. If you need 5 different versions, here's this package. I don't like that many choices, so I'm kind of going middle of the road because for me, I will have decision overwhelm if I'm given too many options. But the beauty of that is, as the writer who's self-publishing, I get to choose what I know will work for me. And that is one of the most beautiful things about self-publishing, is that you do get to have so much more control, especially when we're talking about memoir and such a personal experience and a personal story. You get to choose how you're represented on the cover of your book, how you're represented in your book blurb and your author bio. And that's all really important stuff once you've put years usually into the writing of the story. Of course, people are going to judge the cover. Of course, people are going to read the book blurb to decide if this book is for them. So unfortunately, after the long journey of writing and editing, there's still a little bit more work to do. And then there's all the marketing that comes once your book is out in the world.
And just to name too, I want to touch on the marketing. But first, there are people who are coaches who can help you with this process too. So that's the nice thing about this space is it's very entrepreneurial, and a lot of options have popped up that don't put you in the category of a hybrid publisher where you pay them to do it all for you. There are also independent coaches. One of my colleagues and dear friends, Tony Shavers III, has a coaching package. And for somebody who's like, I wrote all of it. I feel really good about it. I need help being connected to the right freelancer for the formatting and for the cover design. He's somebody who's got multiple people in his wheelhouse, or even proofreading. If they're like, I worked with an editor, but now I've got to do proofreading. Somebody like Tony and others that you can find can help you as a book coach to self-publish. You'll still be in the self-publishing, independent publishing category. So if this is all overwhelming for you, you want somebody to project manage for you, that's an option as well. You will pay for it, but they help, build you a relationship to each of the freelancers. And the marketing, I'm just going to name it. So many of us are writers. We are not marketers. And it's often the thing that people are most surprised about and most at times discouraged by or disheartened by. So it's just good to be aware of this going into the process. When you upload your book on whatever platform after self-publishing, it's such a rush of adrenaline. You feel so great about yourself. And then you realize this book is not going to get to any hands by itself. Marketing is something that's so hard to teach yourself if you don't have a proclivity for it. And I just want to offer a bunch of grace to those of us who feel like, but I'm an introvert and I sit in my cave and I write and now I've got to go promote this thing. Kind of, yes, there's so many different ways you can do it. There's so much you can dive into, whether you stick to the realm of friends and family, whether you lean on paid ads on a platform like Amazon, whether you build relationships with other writers and do giveaways. It's kind of a bottomless pit, and you do get out what you put in. I've worked with over 200 writers at this point, and I've just seen such a vast display of input to the marketing phase, and some of them have gone all in and they get out what they put in, and for others they're like, you know what, this isn't actually what's giving me life, and that's a valid thing to feel too. So just to acknowledge, for anybody who's there and feeling overwhelmed or is looking ahead and being like, oh my gosh, try to get as centered as possible and figure out what feels like the most appropriate journey for you and what the level of dedication feels like it's right for you, so that you don't end this journey feeling like you're somehow failing. because you're not. There's so many different ways that this can take form. Writing the book is the hardest part, and getting into the hands of readers. Now, having done it with my first book from 2019, it can be a long, beautiful, organic process. I still get messages from people who have read my book and pass it along to somebody else. And then years later, I get a message and they're like, hey, I just wanted you to know, like, one of my friends is a therapist. She was a friend from high school. We don't really communicate much anymore, but she keeps it in her office and she gives it out to her therapy clients. And occasionally she'll reach out and say, do you mind sending a signed copy? This person really resonated with your book. How cool is that? The ripples will continue, but you don't have to do it all right away out the gate. You can give yourself a lot of grace in this process.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight that too, that even though the tendency, and of course you should put some effort into the launch of the book because that is the time where you can really hype it because it's new. Don't feel like you've missed your chance if you, for whatever reason, weren't able to capitalize on that moment. Maybe life was happening. We had our guest Julie on, and she was giving birth to her, I think, third kid, like within weeks of publishing her memoir. And then a year later, she started doing, all of her marketing and book tour and all of that. That is perfectly acceptable. It's never too late to put some effort into marketing something that you've published. And I think that leads us very nicely into kind of the last topic we're going to hash out a little bit today of the struggles, the balance of writing and motherhood, and how motherhood has been such an interesting asset to my writing, being able to kind of have that ability to turn on and off the various aspects of my life when, I'm needed here or I do have time to sit down at my desk. And also, there's some struggles that come with trying to find that time, carving out that time, especially as women, as the primary caretakers, oftentimes, in making room for ourselves and our stories amongst the bottles and the, school projects and all of that.
I remember so I'm pregnant with my second right now, and my first is 2. And when I had him, I reached out to a couple of published friends, and I was like, am I ever going to write again? And they were like, oh, honey, give yourself a year, give yourself a year to just be in this state of transition and transformation. Motherhood is an incredible portal. It will feed your creativity in ways you cannot even imagine, but you cannot force it. And then contrary, or in addition, a friend who recently had a baby who's been an incredibly prolific writer reached out to me as well. And she was like, I think I understand, your panic, what you were saying, because she's like, there is no time to write. No, of course there isn't, and for some people, they do make it happen and it becomes a lifeline. And if that's you, lean into it. But if you feel like writing is this additional thing that you're supposed to be doing to keep your identity alive, my friend, let that go. Be so gentle with yourself. Motherhood is a massive transition. You will never lose who you are as a writer and a creator. It is deep within your bones, but you're also integrating a new identity deep within your bones, and it's called motherhood. And they're going to tangle and they're going to tango, and it's going to be a beautiful alchemy, but you cannot get there by forcing it. And you're just going to run yourself ragged, both as a mother and a writer. So my big approach is extreme gentleness and grace with yourself and trusting. I know it's so hard to do because you feel like a different human, and writing usually makes you feel like yourself. Trusting that it's going to come back. You're going to get your time back. You're going to get out of that bubble. And then now, having a 2-year-old, I did find my way back to writing. I found myself being more creative than ever. But of course, the pressure is time. Time becomes this somewhat limited resource on the human plane, at least. I once had somebody tell me your relationship to time is like how you see your life. And so every time I say time is limited, I'm like, do I think I'm limited? But anyway, we'll talk real talk here. Is like you only have so many hours in a day where either your child is sleeping or you have childcare or whatever. And in that, it's going to be a new dynamic of finding margins. And I will say that I am not somebody, you can probably tell from my personality, who promotes like hustling myself to the bone. It's not how I work well. It's not how I thrive. I think it suits some people. I need to be gentle and kind to myself first and foremost. And so when I say writing in the margins, for me, that does not look like getting up early at this time in my life. It does not look like staying up late. My goodness,
Nope.
all the people who can do
Tried it.
that. I'm so amazed. It looks like 20 minutes that I found to myself in the middle of the day and coming to my project and letting myself feel a little discombobulated and confused and lost because I was just making lunch and now I'm trying to dive into a deep emotional space, and that's okay. I don't have 2 glorious hours to sink into my like deep emotional state to like write my memoir the way that I used to. But memoirs get written plenty in 15-minute increments. And you might find that, like, even the format of your book changes to reflect that. Maybe your book wants to take on a voice that's shorter, more succinct chapters. I just finished You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie
Oh,
Smith. I
yes.
know we talked
Love it.
about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like so stream of consciousness, lots
Yeah.
of white space. Those are tools. Those serve a purpose in books. So if you feel like your book is no longer fitting who you were in motherhood before or a certain phase of motherhood and you're out of it, let it change. Once again, your life is not this separate thing from writing and it's like a problem. You're supposed to bring the entirety of your life into this process. And if that looks like 15-minute increments written on your phone, on a train while you're commuting, let that be it. That might be the whole heart of the book in the way that you didn't anticipate. So I feel like motherhood is not separate. It's actually meant to be integrated, even if you never write about the subject itself.
Yeah, and if your target reader is also a busy mom, then maybe that's exactly the style, the format of the book that you need to write. I've talked before on the podcast about how I used to have all this ritual of like getting ready to write. It was so beautiful. I had like the whole day while my kid was at, preschool. And now I work and it's very much like I have 35 minutes between when I get home from my job and when I have to pick her up from school. And I have been able to cultivate that skill where I instantly drop in, I'm in it, I'm doing my thing. I can get a chapter edited or a section rewritten in that 35 to 45 minutes that I have because I'm just using what I have. I mean, most of my book, well, certainly everything past, the maybe second full rewrite, second full draft of it has been done in those smaller increments. So it's absolutely possible to do.
I love how you
Um,
said cultivate it too. I love this reframed definition of discipline. Discipline
mm,
is remembering what you want. And I know a lot of us sort of like, oh, I cringe when I hear that word. And I like think of my dad and like, be a disciplined human or whatever.
mhm,
But to remember what I want, because there's this great book, you might know it, called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he talks about how basically the biggest, he uses sort of war like terminology, but the basic um, enemy of creativity is resistance. And resistance takes the form of all the stories we tell ourselves about why we can't do it. And some of those are legitimate. Some of that is actually burnout trying to talk to you and say, like, set this down. Stop expecting this of yourself and just decide you're going to take 3 months off. Okay. And then we're like, just like be clear with yourself about what you're looking for. But if the resistance is actually more, if it has less backbone to it, and it's not about your well-being, then it is going to take some discipline, which is just remembering that this is what you want to do. And it's going to look different than it did before. And the more that you can lean into that, I think the more you're going to discover about yourself. I'm the same, Elizabeth. I would have this like massive ritual. I love to meditate before I write. I like pick
yes.
a candle with a certain scent that's supposed to trigger my olfactory memories about what I'm writing, all this stuff. And now I just like, if I have an idea and I have a moment to go, I just got to go write it down. I also, just to like name different tools you can use, one of my good friends wrote a book from voice notes she did for a year of her son's first year of life. And she turned it into this book, The Mother Year. And so the form fit the tool that she had to lean into, not because she even wanted to write a book, but because she wanted to survive the first year of motherhood and she wanted to witness herself, which is what writing is. So she used voice notes. And some of my clients will talk to me too. And there's this whole thing of I can't find time to write. Even people who don't have kids say that to me. And then we dissect where they actually have times where they're sitting and doing something else. And if whatever tool you have in your hand, if it's your phone, you can download Scrivener to it. If it's your computer, if it's your voice notes, whatever, however you process best. And especially if you're stuck in a place where you can't move forward with actual writing on your computer, break that loop, do something else, write in a notebook, take notes on your phone, whatever it is, dialogue with a friend and record it. Find different ways to get past this resistance, because it will be a perennial challenge. And your job is to be the acrobat to find your way around it back to your creativity.
I love it. Cirque du Soleil up in here.
Exactly. Let's go.
Jumping through fire hoops, doing what we got to do to get these stories out there.
Wrestle those tigers.
Thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time out to chat today. I know that not only is this episode going to resonate with people and memoir writers are going to find deep insight in this, but also the stuff that you'll be sharing in the Memoir Summit coming up in March is going to be so helpful for people to figure out where they're blocked, to hit the ground running, figure out what they need to do and what that appropriate next step is. So I'm so grateful to have you as a part of my journey and my writing and my community. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor. I love what you're doing. I love who you are as a writer. And I'm just delighted to connect with your audience in this way.